Welcome to Integrated. This is the podcast where we seek to bridge the gap between the intellect and the will so that we can grow as disciples of Christ, surrendering all that we are and all that we have to the truth. Hey guys, welcome back to Integrated. My name is Angela Erickson, and I'm so glad that you are here today. Today we have kind of a different subject matter than the normal stuff that I talk about. I typically talk about, ways that we can bring together the intellect and the soul, as mentioned in my introduction. But so often we're talking about fatherlessness or abortion and all these other issues, but I was thinking recently about just how awful modern dating seems. Um, and I just thought, you know what? I should have like one of these youngins on to come and talk about that. I feel so far removed from what the modern dating scene looks like. Thanks be to God, because I got married almost 10 years ago. We're celebrating my 10-year wedding anniversary this year, and I was 21 years old when we got married. So I just cannot even wrap my tiny little brain around what modern dating looks like. So, of course, naturally for that conversation, I brought on my favorite youngin, the one and only Nicholas Cavazos. But before we get started, please, if you have not already liked this video, please like it, share, subscribe if you're not already subscribed to my channel, and feel free to hit that little bell. It just lets you know whenever I go live, and I've been doing more live shows than pre-recorded because it's just really easier for me to do it that way. But anyway, for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with Nicholas, he is known as the traditional Thomist. He has his own channel, so make sure you check it out and subscribe there. He is an expert on all things St. Thomas Aquinas, and he also is a fellow contributor with me on The Meaning of Catholic. We co-host a show called The Ascent every once in a while. I'm hoping that will get kickstarted back up in November. So anyway, thank you so much, Nicholas, for coming on today and talking about what is the big problem with modern dating today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It's cool to be on this platform. I've never been on this platform before, but we've done like 20 shows together already.
I know. I'm so glad that I was just like, you know what? I need to have Nicholas on. Why haven't I had him on yet? And yes, Margot, I am very blessed to have been married already for a decade, and the next eligible Thomist here. Oh, I like Caitlin. I like her thinking. And Mary here would like to do a Catholic dating show with you. Oh my goodness, could you imagine? That would be so funny. I for one would back that. If anyone wants to start a GoFundMe for the Nicholas Cavazos dating show, it's like a Catholic bachelor. That would be horrible, but also really funny.
Yeah, it'd be the only show that stars me, but I would never appear in one episode because I'd be like, this is weird.
Okay, so I mean, you and I have actually talked a little bit behind the scenes about dating and things like that. Like for what it's like for you, because I mean, for a little bit of background, I mean, I'm not ancient by any means, but I was coming of age before cell phones were like a huge deal. And we did have cell phones, but we didn't have internet access on them. There weren't applications on them to go and connect with people and send inappropriate things. Like it was totally a different era of technology. And it was maybe 4 years after I graduated from high school that really shifted in a big way. So I don't know, what is it like for you? Or where do you want to start even with this conversation? I guess I'm open to seeing where you're open to starting the conversation for you.
Yeah, honestly, anywhere we could talk a little bit about like initially, yeah, dating in the modern 21st century. I can only speak for kind of like how it is in the United States, because there are some of the problems that we do face here in the United States. I have heard and I have seen, at least in my travels, that they're not problems in other parts of the world.
Oh, interesting.
So in my travels over, even in some areas of Western Europe, we often in America think of Western Europe as just like the bastion of liberalism. And there's some truths to that, but really it's more of an American problem, I'd say, than anywhere else. There seems to be an epidemic, both in secular society as well as inside of the church, of just rampant singleness, just everywhere. Even this last Sunday, I was talking to a group of 5 guys after Mass, and we say this like every once a month or something like this, but we're always saying, why is there no young ladies here at the church?
Then you hear women saying the same thing, like, where are the good men?
Exactly. Well, one theory I have thought about that is like all of the dudes. I was serving mass last night, daily mass last night, and there was like 20 single dudes and one single woman. And I was like, this is kind of like an inverse thing, at least with the TLM and the Novus Ordo. All the single guys are at the Latin Mass parish, all the single women go to the Novus Ordo, and they're both saying, where is everyone? We don't know what, like, there seems to be a gap here. But you see this also in secular society. So these 5 dudes on Sunday, they were musing to me like that when you look around, there's not just anyone at the parish, but even in secular society, the type of, I guess, for lack of better words, procedure that dating takes place in is not conducive for somebody who just wants to find a spouse and cleave to that spouse and be with that spouse until death do us part. It's just not convenient. And so I know that a lot of older people are perhaps a little bit more unaware of this epidemic, but it is an epidemic that is big enough that there's lots of not just commentators and news organizations, but I would also say like this is the dominant discussion of my generation right now. I would say when you get out of like the world of like politics, even though it does touch into politics, really the big discussion right now amongst Gen Z and the older elements of Gen Alpha, which is the upcoming one right after me, is the discussion of why is there this massive divide right now between men and women and this like static dating life?
Yeah, that's so interesting because I think about it a lot. I mean, yes, it does touch on politics. Often you're not going to, for example, date someone who doesn't share your political leanings. For example, we're more polarized than ever right now. And I do think that men are more inclined to conservatism and women are more inclined to liberalism and feminism. And so of course there's that barrier there. It's just like, I mean, it all goes back to Adam and Eve in the garden, right? I mean, it really does. But when you throw in, I think technology is really the thing that just made this chasm huge because it allowed people to really further commodify one another. I mean, that was already starting to happen as a result of feminism and sort of, no fault divorce and sex without consequences, birth control, abortion, all of these things. But now you have an app where you can just swipe. Do I like this person? Would I want to try this person out? Yes or no? And so you're just scrolling through, and I've heard of people just sitting on their phones, scrolling left, right, just for hours. And it's just this weird thing where we're like, it's almost like window shopping for somebody to date. And then you're trying to have meaningful conversation, but you've already started on a very superficial level. Of just, and I'm not saying like, yes, you have to be attracted to the person that you're interested in. That's fine. But historically, people got to know each other by mutual friends and friend groups. And I mean, even when my parents were dating, in their teen years, they went out as groups of friends, like getting together, going out to dinner together and like getting to know each other in friend groups. You weren't going on these one-on-one dates. So you got really comfortable with these people before you became quote unquote exclusive. Whereas now we're doing the exact opposite. We're like swiping right and left. And then these people are going to meet at a maybe at a coffee shop and like more innocuous stuff. But a lot of the time they're going to the bar, they're drinking, and then they're sleeping with one another, and then they never see each other again. It's very weird. It's very weird. It's very contrary to like how we are made, and we're made for connection. And of course, I also think a lot about, and this is where the integration component really comes in. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but because our brains release oxytocin when we are intimate with another person. And that's our bonding hormone. And it's like a Band-Aid. You keep ripping it off. Or I've seen some people use the example of using tape, right? The more you bind something together and rip it off, the adhesive stops working. And so now you're weakening bonds between people. And you're making women are having a harder time creating strong bonds when we're actually very much inclined to that naturally, very, very strong bonds. What are your thoughts on that and the impact that is going to have on a broader cultural level if we're not already seeing it? I mean, do you think it's just going to continue to get worse, or what do you see happening with Gen Z and Generation Alpha?
I do see a little bit of hope with us, but you brought up two interesting examples, one with social media and the other one with the Band-Aid analogy, that both go back to anthropology. What is anthropology for viewers who don't know? Anthropology is just the study of man. Like, what is a man? What is a human being? Body and soul. That's what humans are, right? We have a body, physical body. We have a rational soul, meaning a soul that can contemplate and choose. We have these faculties and these capabilities, but because of sin in the world that already inclines us toward that which is evil, right? Evil being the absence of certain goods. Because that's already inside of us, we have to look at Gen Z, especially right now, and say Gen Z is really just the product of what has been going on in the United States for about 60 to 70 years. So you touched on a lot of them, which I'm glad, because you've kind of done the work. But it's like, it really does start with contraception, because then it separates human sexuality from the reproductive act. It splits it in half.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, promiscuity now has a certain license that practically did not exist beforehand. You could have, of course, messed around with before the introduction of contraception, but the risks were so much higher. And
Yeah.
because the society was generally, even if it wasn't a Catholic society, because of its strong Protestant upbringing, it at least was going to say, well, no, you have the moral obligation according to justice to, if you had this child, to raise the child. I mean, you see a bunch of old movies and you see they'll say like, oh, the woman's pregnant, well, you got to marry her then. Like, that's
Well,
just
shotgun weddings. I mean, there's a reason why we talk about shotgun
yeah.
weddings as such. It's like that's just what happened. If there were two people who were young and in love, and maybe ended up being so in love that they made a baby,
Yeah.
yeah, you better make a wife out of that woman. That was the expectation.
Yeah, it's only the just thing to do. And then you see
Hmm.
from there, really, through the promiscuity, no fault divorce gets introduced, which I'm glad that I'm starting to see conservatives bring up more frequently now. This was just
Hmm.
something that wasn't talked about for a long time. I wonder if part of that has to do with like the Reagan neoconservative complex, because he was the one who really introduced it into law. And so I
Yeah.
wonder if that was like a partisan thing that we're just not going to talk about.
Right.
Regardless, it's being brought up today. But so when we see all of this, when we finally get to my generation, how did my generation understand and process love? Now, I'm saying my generation, this was not me growing up. Thankfully, I had a really good upbringing. I had really good parents who really modeled this well. But for most kids, what do they think of when they think of love? If you're growing up in the early 2000s, it's going to be Disney is going to teach you what love is. So you're watching all the old Disney films
Hmm.
and you're thinking, okay, what love is it's when two people just like stumble upon each other and just have this insane spark. Most
Yeah. Yeah.
Disney movies, it's kind of the idea of love at first sight.
It's the
But
infatuation, right?
it's so
It's
much
like
back.
it rests in infatuation, and then when
Uh-huh.
relationships get hard or you lose the spark,
Mm-hmm.
then all of a sudden people are like, "Well, I'm not in love anymore." It's like,
Exactly.
you weren't in love to begin with.
It's going to be the love of the Greeks would distinguish as eros, like this kind
Yeah.
of passionate sexual love. That's what's going to spark. So most of my generation see that, but then what do we practically see manifested in real life? Broken households, mom and dad fighting each other, divorces. I have so many people I know from my generation. It was so common just to hear like, yeah, my family split up when I was 6 or when I was 5 or when I was younger, right? So many. Yeah, exactly. There's
Yeah.
just so many that were broken up. So on the one hand, psychologically, you're thinking love means like this, but then practically it's being manifested like this. So what happens is that because Disney is kind of your model and the parents are like the bad example, when you go into dating, you generally don't have parents who are going to say, it's a bad idea to date in elementary school, in junior high, in high school. You need to wait until you're much older. And fewer of those good parents who do say that are going to give you like, the Thomistic distinctions of why that would be a good idea. So I already have my full lecture planned for my children at the time that will explain rationally why this is a
I can't
foolish
even
idea.
imagine what it would be like to be your child.
I'm just gonna be like, I've already processed all of your objections. It's okay. Um,
You're
but
gonna have like a 10-point slideshow for each of, like, for your kids of like,
oh,
here you go. Here's the PowerPoint. I don't know if you
mhm.
still use PowerPoint. Do you kids use PowerPoint? Or is that
uh, when our professors force us to, but that's gonna be about the only time that we need when a professor's like, yeah, you
I'm
need to get
getting
the
so
PowerPoint,
old.
and you're just like, a PowerPoint, really?
Yeah,
All
what is
right.
that?
I'd bring my typewriter to school next, I guess. Um, but what ends up happening is like, so you see all of that mixes all together. Kids start dating really, really young. They're not dating for marriage. They're dating because of infatuation. And then what takes place is that you see from there a whole movement of people who go forward and they date and then they split. They date and then they split. So they get used to breaking up. Why do I emphasize this? Well, then in our anthropology, we've made this now a habit, right? We've made a
Right.
habit of when like someone disappoints me. Sometimes it could be for legitimate causes, but when someone disappoints me, even for superficial things, I'm just going to leave. Well, what happens is that when you have an improper understanding of love plus this habit, when you finally get to marriage, if that even happens, which my generation is not getting married, so I'll touch on that in a minute. But when you finally get to marriage, you now have a habit of breaking up with someone for no reason. So divorce is so common, right? So now to boil this all down to this point on the Band-Aid, we've built up these habits inside of us where we're always looking for something better. And this is exactly what dating apps have done. Dating apps don't force you to sit down, get to know the person, get to like experience their friend group, or even in the olden days, get to experience their family, right? It doesn't force you to do that. It doesn't force you to commit a whole lot of time. It only allows you to look at the superficial qualities. So what do they look like? Could I see myself with this person? If you're going through a dating app and you're thinking like, oh, can I see myself with this person? You don't even know what their voice sounds like. You know, how can you make these determinations already? But we're doing that. And so when you do that long enough, you're eventually only going to not, if you're only seeking for pleasure, you're just going to go looking for it. And that's why, Tinder, everyone knows what Tinder's for. It's not for actual dating. It's just for hooking up. Everyone knows that most dating apps outside of that, right, are going to be for generally relationships in which most dating apps now, you can actually say like what kind of relationship you're looking for. So long term, I'm looking for a short term thing. That
I
sounds
know.
so
It's
insane.
horrible. I
It's
know.
so insane.
It's so interesting because there are a few things that you brought up that I'm like, oh, I want to touch on all of these different things. I'm trying to think of where I want to start first. I think one thing I want to discuss too is when you have a broken upbringing, and depending on what that looks like, often because we're not as parents too. I think we've sort of let kids determine what dating looks like instead of parents setting boundaries. They've been almost non-existent in that aspect. And I think about when I was in high school, I dated a guy for, I don't know, 3.5 years, pretty much all of high school. I had had a crush on him since like 7th grade. I was that person that like I had my eye set on something and I was not going to be deterred, even if it was extremely bad for me. And I didn't have parents that were helping direct that properly. It was sort of like, this is you figure this out, kind of. Just don't get pregnant, don't be sexually active, but you figure this world out. And I had no guidance and I did not have anyone to confide in. And so what ended up happening is I was in a very emotionally abusive, manipulative relationship for 3.5 years, and it destroyed me. I mean, it was because those years are so formative, and I reflect back on that teenage person of who I was and the things I was doing at that age that I would never want my children to be doing, because I was betraying myself over and over and over again, trying to get love. And so I think there's a problem with that too. And you see women doing it all the time with staying with somebody forever and the guy's not willing to commit. That's the other end of it. I mean, it's not always just people serially dating and, ripping off Band-Aids. It's also the women who are trauma bonded, who are afraid to step away because they want someone to love them so desperately that they will betray themselves over and over again, hoping that this person will commit at some point. And so I think those are they're like the sides of the pendulum. You can be on either side of it. And of course the moderation, the middle is proper and appropriate. So what are your thoughts on that end of things too, with the lack of commitment that we're seeing amongst your generation? Do you think that is also rooted in kids not having parents that were married? Like
Most
afraid, fear to commit? Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that when you see, because it's like our parents are going to be kind of our role models, especially when you're younger. I mean, who else are you going to turn to? I know so
Mhm.
many young guys who their fathers were either absent physically, like completely gone out of their life, or they were just absent even emotionally,
Mhm.
where they turned kind of to their coach. It's so common that a lot of guys will turn to their coach or one of
Yeah.
their teachers or something like that to kind of fill in that male role model. Same thing for young ladies. Maybe their mom is absent in physically or emotionally, and so they start looking for other people. So
Mhm.
we should first recognize that like that's not a bad thing. Like in the sense that like while it's bad that those situations are taking place, the desire for love itself is not a bad thing.
For sure.
Like
Yep.
those are good. Like you're programmed for love. And I think it's probably my second or third favorite treatise in St. Thomas's Summa. But it's very, very short. It's called the Treatise on Beatitude. It's at the beginning of his first part of the second part of the Summa. And it's fairly long, but basically what he talks about is he's talking about the idea of happiness. How is man going to be happy in this life? And he goes through a bunch of different common objections of his day, but they're universally applicable. Will pleasure fulfill us in this life? Will money fulfill us in this life? Will power? Will influence? Will prestige? Will strength? Etc. He goes through all of these things. And then he finishes and he shows from a rational perspective why they can. Like, for instance, with
Mhm.
money can't be the end of man's life. It can't fully fulfill you, even if you have all the money you want. Why? Because what do you do with money? You do it to get food so that you live longer. So money is actually a means to an end, but it's still a temporal and it's not a final thing.
Mhm.
So God can only be the person who can be. And we love God not because of what he gives us, because of who he is himself, because he is all lovable. We love him. But because we also have this desire to be with other people, we should have this desire to share his love, whether it be in the context of friendship or romance or whatever with other people. But when you see this breakdown with the parents, you're going to go looking for it with other people.
Mhm.
Even in really good families, this can still be a problem. I'll give an example. So I was raised in a really, really good household. My mom and dad are still together. They love each other very, very much. They were very good role models. But my mom was still somewhat absent on the emotional level growing up.
Mhm.
And she's worked through this all now, so we're all on good terms now. But she used to, when I was younger, she would have these bouts of severe anger, right? Severe anger. And
Mm.
she would be very angry at myself and my younger sibling. And so this kind of subconsciously built in this idea of perfectionism. I had to be perfect with my grades, had to be perfect with
I
my
can
room,
relate to that a lot.
yeah, I
Mhm.
had to be perfect in all these ways. So I was desiring this female emotional approval more than anything. So subconsciously, I wasn't aware of it at that age, but that's what I was
Mhm.
desiring. I was wanting to meet that approval. So whenever I got into my first, I would say, well, my second real relationship that I've ever really had, it was one where I walked into it very, very excited, right? This took place like 3 or 4 years ago. I was very, very excited venturing into this new relationship of, pairing with this person. And through getting to know this person, I really got to the point where I thought like, oh, I could actually realistically see myself getting married to this person. Well, what ended up happening? Out of absolutely nowhere, this girl breaks up with me, right? She just breaks up with me. And she doesn't really give me a reason why. Her exact reason was, I just don't feel the same way anymore. Now, that sounds very similar to what we're talking about because it's like,
Mhm.
what do you mean by that? Especially also at the time, I was 21. Looking back on it now, I'm like, that was kind of a very middle school sounding answer. I just don't feel the same way. Like people who are actually committed to each other, obviously, that's not a real excuse um,
Right.
in the long run. But what ended up happening is from that, I had an unhealthy bond toward her that was rooted in my mom not giving me the affection that I really needed as a kid. So it was for about, I would say, 10 months after that. I was kind of that person who was always still wanting to get back together with her, not knowing how that could take place. Well, comes to find out, I found out at the end of that the reason why she broke up with me was because she was actually seeing a guy who's twice her age, right? Who was in his 40s.
Ooh.
And it was insane. It was really, really crazy. But then what that showed me was, oh, well, I am, without even really rationally thinking through things, following this girl, I don't, here, there, and everywhere, all to the point until I finally find out this insane truth, Thankfully, then it kind of snapped me out of it, and I went on my own journey of healing and full recovery. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like these deep-seated things, they're rooted in us. And so when we go back out into the dating life, it's just going to be a learning experience. It doesn't mean that you have to have everything together, right? This is
No.
perfect emotional.
I can attest to that,
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because even before, like I said, I sort of came of age right before there was this ubiquity with dating applications and things like that. And even I met my husband. I'd just broken up with my ex-boyfriend, and I met him 11 days later.
Mm-hmm.
And my full intention was to go to college and be single. I was like, I don't even know who I am anymore, because so much of my identity had been tied up with this person. I mean, often people would say, if they kind of knew who I was, they'd be like, oh, that's so and so's girlfriend. Like, I didn't even have a name anymore. I was just so and so's girlfriend.
Sure.
And I just didn't even know who I was anymore. And I was fully intending going to college and figuring that out. And I met my husband 11 days later. It's like, God, you are kind of funny, but okay, fine. And we started hanging out, and I knew 3 months into our relationship that we were going to get married. I had this like Holy Spirit moment. I can distinctly remember it was like being struck by lightning. And I had this infused knowledge that I was going to marry him. I can remember where I was sitting, what we were doing, everything. And that doesn't mean that we didn't struggle. I mean, I was still broken and wounded. And so even in college, I had a lot of people whispering in my ear of like, people in my family, like, you should be dating around, you should be getting to know other people, you should be doing all these things. And eventually, things got hard, and I started listening to that. And so, I really screwed things up a lot, and after lots of healing and introspection, really looking at why am I like this, and what's going on here in our relationship, that it's not just about feeling the same way anymore, but are we able to work through these issues that we're having in a healthy way, instead of me listening to the devil and just like feeling justified, trying to make up reasons why I would do these things, And yeah, I think that was when I realized, like, this is not about my feelings anymore. Like, I have to make a choice, and that's what love is, right? And I think a lot of young people today, they haven't seen sacrifice. They've seen people bail, so they don't trust people, and so making sacrifices for other people in the long term is too vulnerable, because there's too much of a risk. What are your thoughts on that?
110%. There's actually two angles that you could approach this idea with. I'm glad you brought it up. So like the first one is that, so we don't see that, but I would also say that we don't demand sacrifice from our young people at all anymore. We have a whole society which is built for our own comfort, right? Like in here, there, and everywhere, to where now if you're saying to people, you should suffer in the context of you should work out, that's now offensive. Like, I mean, we have such a society which is geared.
How dare you?
I know. How dare you? Greta Thunberg, she's watching over us.
How dare you? Yeah.
At least she can meme it herself, I guess. Yeah, no, so it's like we have a whole society which built up around not suffering. So we have these habits which are already prone to sin, turn inward toward ourselves, as opposed to being a gift of self to someone else. But part of being a gift of self is denying oneself, right? And so this gift of oneself could manifest itself in the context of a married couple, right, who's disagreeing, but yet they come together and one sacrifices something for the greater good. There's a zillion and one examples you could give. But it's very, very important. So I think we need to start demanding a little bit more sacrifice from our young people to build into them the idea of like giving up those things. Again, according to reason, you need to show them why. The second thing is that I'd say my generation is very hesitant to commit. And I can even speak to this a little bit. There was a time post that breakup for about 2 years afterward. I didn't date anybody. And there's still, even now, these niggling vestiges where I sometimes can get nervous at the idea of going on dates, not because I'm afraid to ask a girl on a date, not because I'm afraid to take a girl on a date, but because I'm afraid of who is she? Like there's so many broken people that it's like after you've been cheated on once, you're kind of like, do I really want to
Mm.
commit my time and effort? Like, how do I know that I can trust this person? Now, I'm not saying that that's right to do, because that is a wound and you can't judge someone else by someone else's sins. But even
Mhm.
on the societal level, a lot of men aren't dating and getting married because the system, in a certain sense, is rigged against men. How is this so?
Yeah, explain
Well,
that.
I was like, how is this so? Well, especially through when we take no fault divorce as our first ingredient of the soup. And then we also include into that a lot of this stuff with gender. And on top of it, right, I would say maybe an overcorrection when it comes to women talking about sexual assault, an overcorrection in the sense of we have all of these scandals now where people are literally getting, they're fired and sometimes arrested, and then it's proven like, oh, these girls were making it up. There's the famous story of, I forget which university this was at, but a university Ivy League student was canned from the university because two women accused him of sexual assault. And he went to jail, lost a ton of money. In his court, they finally came out in his court. The women came forward and said, yeah, we admit that we lied. Well, by that time, but see, the thing
He
is,
lost everything by
yeah,
that time.
there was a good element in the Me Too movement that got overcorrected to where now it's kind of like, if you talk to most of the guys that I know, a lot of guys, we all joke about like how it literally can just be one random girl that we have no clue who they are. If she says something, it's going to be societal havoc. So when we take these things and we throw them in together, a lot of guys are asking themselves and saying, okay, let's say I was to build up a company, right? Where I had a lot of money. I'm making decent money. Do I want to put myself in the position where I get married and then this woman, for no reason, through no fault, can divorce me? And generally speaking, judges are always going to rule for the women in the case of custody of the child. So I'm going to have my child taken away from me totally, if not at least the majority of the week. And in a lot of states, she could even trans the child, and I, as a
Mhm.
father, could have nothing to say about it. And I'm going to have to be paying for quite a bit of this. So you see this system, right, which was an overcorrection of it. It's like this example. How many um, centers for male sexual assault is there in the United States? There's one in the entire country, just one
Wow.
in the entire
I
country.
just got goosebumps, and I just interviewed a survivor of childhood sexual abuse,
And that,
and
that was a great interview, by the way. Like it
thank
was really,
you.
very good. And there's just one. There's just one. And it's the thing is it's like in male society, for lack of better words, in male circles, um, it is kind of like just something where if it happens to you, you're just kind of told, well, just deal with it and kind of move on from that, which is horrible. Like whether it's male or female that's hurt or abused in one of these situations, they shouldn't be maligned for, or especially in the context of male, oh well, you're just less of a man. You didn't like the fact that she was coming on to you or something like that. Like, I mean, these
Mhm.
types of things that you see in certain male circles, I think is very, very sad. And so that's why men are hesitant. It's just like, yeah, why get married if those are the consequences?
Well, and it really fuels the porn industry because men are still wanting connection. And of course, they've been told that, these types of behaviors are healthy and normal. And then women, because of the way everything is set up too, they sort of feel like this is expected of them. They should be sending these types of pictures, and it
Hmm.
just so it fuels the disconnection when you're constantly looking at all of these different individuals that you're maybe not even seeing in person or anything like that,
Hmm.
but you're creating a type of bond with them online. Like that's another thing too. I've heard exorcists talk about this, the
Hmm.
way that our souls are binding to these people who are putting themselves out there, and we're interacting with them in a particular way, and the damage that that does to the soul, which is something I
Yeah.
don't think people think about all that often.
Yeah, no, it's very true. One thing I brought up in a chat not too long ago is that there's this statistic that's going around, which it's very, very telling. Men and women are kind of going off into two very, very strong periods. You have a whole movement of men, right? This was a thing maybe even a decade ago, but right, it used to be called MGTOW, right? Men going their own way, right? So it was all these dudes who were so tired of women that they were like, we're done with dating culture. Let's just go do our own thing, right? Be
Mhm.
successful. if they want, they can like sleep around, but there's no like commitment to people, etc. There's also like the whole incel movement, which is,
Yes, that
in my opinion, like I empathize a lot with where they are, but I don't agree with them. And I still think that what
they
they're doing,
come to the wrong
I
conclusions.
come to the wrong conclusion. And so like you see all these dudes who like still want to be with the girl, but think I can never be with the girl, you know, it's over. And so then they go further than that. That's crazy. Women, on the other end, there's this statistic that just came out. There are now more young women and married women who are now doing OnlyFans than there are teachers in the United States.
No way.
Right? Yeah. And there's
No way.
4 million teachers in the United States.
That cannot be true. Is that
And
true?
yeah, it's come out just recently that there's
Lord
now
Jesus, have
more
mercy.
women doing that. And so it's just like when I was a kid, you could, like a little kid, you could have justly said, right, that the girl would have been nervous if inappropriate photos of her were leaked around school. But that's not the case anymore. Now every girl, not every girl obviously, but a large minority of women are making it themselves. And on top of that, when you also have a society in which is saying like that's a positive thing, that's a liberating thing. The United States is definitely in our teenage phase. We're better than everybody. We're louder than everybody. We want to sleep around with everybody. We want everyone to know how great we are. And it's just not becoming to holiness. And so you see both guys and girls going off this, and then Catholics in the middle who just want to get married
Yeah.
are being pulled one way or another to where maybe they don't accept this, but they don't know where to turn for the answers.
Well, where would you turn? Like, what do you think young Catholics should be doing, especially? And I know you said you're seeing some promising trends.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on what young people should be doing? Because I have my own ideas, but maybe they're antiquated. I don't understand how any of this stuff works anymore. It's crazy because I'm not that old, but because technology changes so rapidly, I don't feel like a digital native anymore, even though I'm a part of the generation that was moved through the phases of antiquated like rotary phone type stuff when I was little. I mean, I still
Mm-hmm.
remember our house phone being connected on a
I had those.
cord.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and then all of a sudden here we are, and it's a completely different animal. I mean, everyone's got a porn theater in their pocket now.
Literally, yeah. I don't think your advice would be antiquated, mainly because mine comes from the angelic doctor, which is going to be based in
Let's
like
hear it. What
eternal
would St. Thomas have to say?
for So I thought a lot actually about like what St. Thomas and also St. Alphonsus Liguori would have to say if they were to come back to today. And oh my goodness, like first off, they would probably be chastising the entire church for not talking about like they'd probably first ask, Holy Father, where's the encyclical on pornography? We're waiting for that. The fact that that's like not a thing.
That's insane.
And it's been
Correct.
ravaging Western countries for decades, and it's just not been talked about at all. The fact, like, I know that there's one, I forget which diocese this is. There's in the United States, there's one really good diocese, which the bishop, thankfully, mandates all of his priests to at least preach on contraception once a year. But I've never heard sermons that talk about like these like issues. They don't have to talk about it in a blunt fashion, but they can also just like bring them up. That's a good idea. Like at least bring them up. But what they probably say is this. So they first would say like for Catholics who want to get married, they first need to ask themselves why they want to get married. So let me debunk something very quickly. There is no such thing as like, a Catholic waiting around saying, God, give me, like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be married or be single. I don't know if I'm called to either. Which one am I called to? You are naturally called to marriage by your anthropology. Like you on a natural level are called to marriage. So you don't need to wait for like some special buzz or some special thing. Like just throw that out. That's what it is. A vocation to a higher state, to a religious state, is the extra phone call that you're looking for, right? And it's not necessarily a sign or anything like that. You're looking more for legitimate affections. If you are looking for signs, it's going to be signs of things like, okay, I can realistically see myself following the 3 evangelical councils in the context of taking a vow. But for Catholics who are wanting to get married, they're like, okay, I don't have a desire to be chaste my entire life. I want to have a spouse. I want to have kids, etc. Then what they need to do first is start working on their own virtue, right? So for men and women, humility and chastity are going to be the two big ones that they need to tackle, humility and chastity. So with humility, you're going to be realistically looking at yourself. And realistically, what I mean by that is it's first, humility likes to puff ourselves up above reason. That's what pride really is. It's puffing ourselves up above reason. So you need to practice humility first, but you also don't want to practice a false humility, which is called pusillanimity, right? Which is like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just terrible. I can never do anything right, et cetera, right? It's kind of the downer and the moper of the crowd, right? It's not that you don't be an Eeyore about it, right? You need to see yourself realistically, right? So that's the first thing. With chastity, chastity is extremely important to practice. Chastity means to chastise the concupiscible, or like the sexual appetite inside of man, right? To moderate it according to reason. How do you do that on a practical level? On a practical level, yes, good word, concupiscence. How you practically engage in this is, so I have a whole video on this subject. Actually, if people want a full treatment on it, it's called Lust Will Send You to Hell, right? And it's going over St. Alphonsus's rules as well as Father Prumer's great manual on it. But basically, the way that you practice it is that you're never going to, in a deliberate fashion, try to excite the sexual passions outside of the context of holy matrimony, right? That's going to be the basic aspect of it. And so, gentlemen, like, what are you looking at? I'm not even just talking about pornography. I'm just talking about, like, when you look at even St. Alphonsus, he goes so as far as to say, like, why are you just casually looking at the opposite sex when you don't even have an intention to try to go and court them, you know?
Can I touch on that? Because I think it's very, with the way social media is, especially things like Instagram that are visual, it's
Mm-hmm.
so easy to just scroll, and it's this unnatural curiosity, or inordinate
Yeah.
curiosity, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I thought about earlier when I was like, oh, there are a few things I want to talk about. It's this curiosity that we have because we live in this very hedonistic culture right now, and so we're taught to be inordinately curious about people, and that to let our gaze wander or linger a little bit longer than it should. And when you're on social
Mm-hmm.
media all the time, it doesn't matter if you're male or female. It's so easy to be like, oh, what are they wearing? What are they wearing? And it's easy to linger, and you're like, actually, that just even lingering, even if you're appalled by something, the right response is to run the opposite direction, not to
Yeah.
linger, because those images remain in your brain, and it is something against chastity and building up the walls of your heart to protect your heart and your mind. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure we got that in there, because that curiosity
Yeah.
is a huge problem.
It reminds me of this quote. I think it comes from, it's St. Francis de Sales' Introduction to the Devout Life, where he's talking about, I forget the chapter title. It's on chastity. I think it's called The Lily of the Virtues. I think that's the chapter title. And also false friendships. He goes, the one on false friendships, man, that's convicting, because basically what he says is, he's talking about this in the context of men and women. And he says, what are you doing, going around making like a flirtatious style friendship with someone who you have not the intention to get married? He
Mm,
says that is an abortion to a friendship, like to a real friendship. Because what you're
mm,
doing is, a true friendship is that you admire the virtuous qualities in one another, and you wish to emulate that yourself, and you're wanting to push them forward in the greater pursuit of virtue. That's going to be Aristotle's basic definition, and you're going to go up from there. But if you are just going to it with the perspective of, like, what can I get out of this? Right? Feminine companionship, but without the commitment, male companionship without the commitment,
mhm,
then you are destroying the potentiality for real friendship, as well as you're just messing around with them, which is going to be against justice, right? So it's going to be wrong. So men and women got to practice both humility and chastity. Where I do see a little bit of hope for my generation is, I do see a lot of young men and young women who are, my generation is so incredibly nostalgic for just anything that's not now. And so with that, I do see a lot of young people who are saying, would it be nice if we could go back to, like, the 50s model of, dad goes out to work and mom's at home with the kids, et cetera, et cetera. And to where now I'm starting to see that actually posted in the world of dating social media apps. There's women who are
interesting.
actually advertising, like, I'm wanting to be the 50s trad wife at home.
Okay, but yuck.
And
Like, I'm sorry, I think the
uh,
trad wife thing is so gross.
It depends on what you define as it, because
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
it's like if it's an internet definition that like has been around for all of 6 seconds, then okay, perhaps. I
It's
think
like
what
a
they mean
it's
by
like a
it,
new fetish for
yeah, it's like
conservatives.
I think what most of these women mean when they say it is, I just want to be a mom
Yeah.
and not have to go out and, work. I do want to like take care of my husband when he comes home and take care of the kids. I think that that's more of what most women mean by it.
I hope
There's
so.
definitely, yeah, there's
Ooh,
definitely going to be, the outliers, but the exception proves the rule, I would say.
good. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I think I am seeing that too. I think more people are starting to reject wanting it's hard. A lot of people want to not be online and so often.
Yeah.
There's
Hmm.
a huge movement I'm seeing right now of people trying to disassociate from social media and things like that, which is great. But at
Hmm.
the same time, we're so addicted. Like
It's the most addictive thing on the planet.
it is,
It
and
truly
it's
is.
designed to be, you know?
Exactly.
And so
Whoever came up with this, man, they're making
brilliant.
bank. Like absolute brilliant person. Knew man's anthropology so well. And was just like, how can I get this highly addictive thing in their pocket that could buzz at them or even trigger their body to where you think that it's buzzing and you're looking at it
Yes,
and nothing's
yes.
actually happening. Yeah.
It is wild. And
Really.
so it would be amazing. I'm nostalgic even doing this kind of stuff. I mean, having a podcast, the internet has been great in some respects, of course. It connects us from across the country, across the world. That can be amazing. But I mean,
It's a
I think
double-edged sword.
it also sort of destroyed people's childhoods too, like the very
Yeah.
foundations. And so I understand why so many people are looking backwards and saying, I want to be a child again that just goes outside and plays all day. And I see
Mhm.
a movement of people reconnecting that way. And so my hope is that as we continue to sort of heal and go back a little bit, maybe in a healthy way, revisit some of those fundamental core things that will have a beneficial effect on our relationships with one another. And that's why I tell people all the time, I'm like, go touch grass. I know that's like
I
it's kind
mean,
of
yeah.
trite, but it's
Uh-huh.
it's true. Like go touch
Sure, yeah.
grass. It's actually really good for you physiologically. Grounding is a real thing. Go touch grass and go
Angela's a hippie.
physically see.
She's
I'm a little
exposed
bit of a
herself.
hippie.
It's a Minnesota hippie
I'm a
talking
little
to a
bit.
Southerner who's just like, "What is this nonsense?"
Grounding is real. You have an electrical charge in your body. Go touch grass. Okay. But anyway, what are your final thoughts, Nicholas? And of course, tell us about what you have going on.
Yeah, I guess final thoughts, at least on the subject of dating, is it's like, so like there is going to be somebody who's going to be out there for you if that's God's plan. So that is like one thing that you can rest assured of, no matter when it comes. I know that that's kind of the last thing that people want to hear, especially whenever they're not having success in the dating market. Like, don't worry, there's more fish in the sea. And you're just sitting there like, you say that as a married person. Like
Yeah.
it is not the world's nicest thing, but there is some truth in it. Like, you have to first recognize that you were first meant for God. So if that's the case, then practicing virtue for that end of unification with God is going to be so much more important. And if you are destined to have a spouse, it's only going to be because God is using that as the avenue to help you become a saint and get to heaven, right? So you have to look at heaven as the final goal, and you're just looking at which road do I take, right? Is it going to be the road of priesthood, right? Is it going to be the road of the religious? Is it going to be the road of the mother and the wife, the husband and the father? What road is it going to be? Right now, you might not be any of those things, but it could be the road of a student, the road of a son, the road of a daughter, the road of a friend, the road of an employee, right? It could be any of those things. It could just be even simply the road of a layperson in the local parish, right? Helping the priest out, helping the community out, etc. So recognizing that God is your end, the practice of virtue and the reception of the sacraments is going to help you get there. It's going to be a matter of time that you're going to find out that final thing. So don't lose hope. Don't let the devil just tell you like, oh, there's no one out there for you. You're irrefixable. That's what a lot of people suffer from. So don't fall into that. Recognize that like if that's going to be your goal and God is your love, then you'll get there.
He works all things for the good of those who love him, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for coming on today. Do you have anything going on your channel? What's going on with the traditional Thomist?
Yeah, so I have 3 projects coming out hopefully within the next 2 weeks. So one's coming out tomorrow. Very, very spicy stuff. It's actually talking about it's a thesis that I have been well, it's not my own, but I'm kind of the mailman. A thesis that's been out for a while, which is basically going to try to be giving a better answer to all of the absolute insanities that we have going on right now in the church. I don't know about you, Angela, but I got like 50,000 messages yesterday with all the drama breaking everywhere. But
I
it's
had a
kind of
few. Yeah.
it's kind of fun just because I finally get to see some stuff moving as opposed to like just sitting here talking about the same old hypotheticals. So I was like, okay, at least
Yeah.
there's a new chess piece on the board and we can actually move around. So I'm going to be coming out with the video tomorrow talking about the infamous Archbishop Lefebvre, right? May he pray for us. And his thesis on the conciliar church, the Catholic Church. What does all of that mean? Does it apply to us? Is it just rhetorical, theoretical? What is it? So we're going to be talking about that a little bit tomorrow. And I'm going to be talking about that further with Anthony and Rob over on Avoiding Babylon on Thursday night. So if you're wanting the like scholastic treatment, come to my channel. If you're wanting the gag treatment, come to that one. If you're wanting, and then after that, I also have a documentary coming out, hopefully in the next week or two, a documentary called Salvation by the Light. And it is my experience being in Clear Creek Monastery for 30 days, reading the whole of St. Thomas's Summa front to back, the experiences I learned, some of the things that I learned, the practice and life of the monks, as well as what it's even like to just be in that setting as someone who's an outsider in the technical terms. And then the final thing I have coming up, at least in this broader time, is going to be, I don't even know how long it is, but it's around a 15 to 20 hour long video. It's easily going to be 2 parts, 2 very, very long parts, but it is, I've been literally begged hundreds of times in person and online to do this, but it's going to be a full reaction video of me going through point by point the infamous Salza SSPX interview on Matt Fradd's show,
Oh
and
my
addressing it
goodness.
point by point. And I've done most of it. Most of it's done. But it's just so long, and brevity, as you guys can probably tell from watching this video, is not my strong suit at all. So that is why it's going to be so
You're
long.
very thorough. You are super thorough.
I will just be up at night being like, oh man, I forgot this one minute point. The whole thing is wrecked, you know?
Oh no. Yeah, it's funny because with everything coming out too about the synod and the dubia and everything else, I'm actually going to be addressing it too, which is something I haven't done on my channel. But Tim Flanders is going to be coming on and we're going to talk about everything.
Absolutely,
So
Chad.
yep, I figured he was a great, very balanced person to go to have this discussion. And I feel like at some point we have to address it because I foresee a lot of people's faith being shaken. And um, I know that has been my inclination in the past. And so I want to curb that as much as possible. And so make sure you guys are subscribed to both of our channels and, stay up to date with what we're doing. You can find Nicholas over on Instagram as well at the Traditional Thomist, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just great to have you on today. Thank you for coming on, Nicholas.
Yeah, absolutely. This is fun.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, we'll see you soon. And hopefully we get the Ascent going back up and running on Meaning of Catholic. But for all of you guys watching, thank you so much for joining us today and God bless.